Good morning, everybody. We have a brilliant show today. We have Senator Black with us, and also we have another guest. We'll be doing a guest again today. I would like to start off by making a mention of Bill Jones. He is an editor and contributor of the Executive Intelligence Review and author of The Rise of China and the Revival of Global Development. He will be here to talk to us about some of the latest events that are happening with China, some of our events that may not be moving in the diplomatic route, and some of the other events, including Japan as well. So, Senator, I want to pass it off to you if you want to make a mention before we bring our guest on.
Yes, thank you, Morgan. And I just want to add that Bill Jones is a very highly respected intelligence analyst for Executive Intelligence Review. I think he's very well known within international diplomatic circles. I certainly have the greatest respect for him and his analysis. And he just wrote this article, "Can the Asia Pacific tolerate a more aggressive Japan?" And so with that, Bill, could you please give us a briefing on what is happening? Our show is going to be a little bit shorter today. We'll end somewhere around the half-hour point. But Bill is very good at summarizing extremely important things. Bill?
Thank you, Senator. Pleasure to be with you here today. The thing that has happened most recently that has probably focused some more attention on the Asia Pacific, while people have been mainly focused on Europe and Ukraine war and everything going on around the possible negotiation. There's a lot of things going on in Asia which are causing a lot of tremendous turmoil. It was set off by comments made by the new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, who commented that a Chinese intervention in Taiwan, which of course the Chinese recognize as their territory, as a part of China, would be a survival-threatening situation for Japan. Now, Japan, after World War II, created their defense forces, which were solely to be used to defend Japan against possible attack. There have been moves now over the last 5, almost 10 years to change that policy, to expand it so that Japan could utilize their defense forces in other than an attack on Japan. And in 2014, the Constitution was changed to say a situation which was survival threatening or which was threatening to a key ally of Japan would also be a reason for the Japanese defense forces to move in. All of these things, of course, have caused something of a stir among many nations in the Asia Pacific, knowing the history of Japan during World War II. But specifically, the survival threatening situation comments of Takaichi set off a firestorm in Beijing. And it has set off a number of, it's really on several levels, it has caused problems. One, of course, is the sensitivity of the relationship with Japan. While China and Japan have, in the post-war period, generally developed a good relationship on the economic and trade front, there is still the memory of the Japanese atrocities that were conducted not only against China, but also against all of the countries which Japan occupied during World War II. And this was especially the case now, being the 80th anniversary of the end of that conflict. There have been movies and documentaries and many things that have brought that again to life in China and other countries. So that in itself has become a major problem. But more significantly, the fact that Japan has effectively indicated in its comments that Taiwan and Chinese intervention in Taiwan would be something that they would react against, indicates that they no longer accept the one China policy. Now, of course, the People's Republic of China, in joining the international community, made certain commitments themselves, but the prerequisite was that the countries, that the nations of the world accepted the fact that there really was only one China, and that Taiwan was, at least legally, a part of China. And of course, in all the documents from the end of World War II, confirm that, including by the United States after the war, which indicated to the then Republic of China that all of the territories that had been taken by Japan during the course of really two wars. There was an earlier Sino-Japanese War in 1894 and 1895, in which they began to control Taiwan, which otherwise had been a part of the Chinese Empire at the time. So that principle, which is laid at the basis of China's relationship with the rest of the world, is now being brought into question indirectly by the statements that were made by Japan. The reaction of China has been almost immediate. They have encouraged Chinese tourists, and there are many of them that go to Japan, not to go. They have stopped student exchanges. They have also stopped buying much of Japan's seafood. And they have also taken it to the United Nations. The letter was written to the Secretary General of the United Nations by the Chinese representative, asking him to raise a complaint against Japan because it undermines the effective one China policy that existed as a basis of the United Nations as well. That's the basis of China taking the seat that once was held by the Republic of China.
Bill, if I could just interject here. And I'm sure you know the history much better than I do, but it was very interesting that under Richard Nixon, he was the one who began the ping pong diplomacy and very skillfully orchestrated the rapprochement between the United States and the People's Republic of China. And Taiwan had formerly had a seat on the Security Council. And it took a tremendous amount of skill to get the nations of the world to shift and somehow to get that seat on the Security Council moved from Taiwan to the People's Republic. So I think that the shift of the seat on the Security Council was a pretty clear demonstration that the world accepted this notion that Taiwan was a part of China, and really that sort of general understanding has seemed to hold up very well. And despite frictions between mainland China and Taiwan, there really has been peace. And I think what's happened in some ways is that just our prodding, and particularly when we had Nancy Pelosi go flying over there to sort of wave the bayonet in everyone's faces, that puts pressure then on the People's Republic of China to articulate the importance of reuniting with Taiwan, which normally I think would be sort of kept at a low key, because I don't think there's some burning desire in the People's Republic to launch an invasion across 150 miles of deep blue sea to attack a very mountainous, very rugged piece of terrain. Everything seemed to work as long as you didn't have hostile nations trying to sort of put a stick in the eye of the People's Republic.
That's exactly the problem. Up until 1992, there was an agreement between China, between the People's Republic and Taiwan, of working together. There was a lot of Taiwanese investment in China, and vice versa. And China became a major market for Taiwanese products, so that things were relatively stable. For China, of course, you're absolutely right that while the idea that Taiwan is a part of China is deeply rooted, not only in the government, but I think also among the Chinese people, the options that they see that are most advantageous to them is that there be peace in the world and peace over the Taiwan Strait. So I don't think they would make any military move on Taiwan unless it were seen as the last possibility for not losing Taiwan, for Taiwan not declaring independence. And I think that was also the consensus on the island as well for a long time. And it was a lot of the outside interference, which was based on the fact that China was becoming a major producer in the world. As long as China was a poor country of billions of people, everybody was happy that they could accept it. But when it became really the major productive unit in the world economy, and now moving towards heights in science and technology, there are all kinds of attempts to try and undermine it and to stop that development. And the Taiwan issue is, of course, one of them. If you look at it from their side, Taiwan, the Chinese Communist Party won the Civil War against the forces of Chiang Kai-shek. And I would claim that they won the war is because they largely won the hearts of the people. And of course, Chiang, who represented the Republic of China for many years, even his American advisors, including George Marshall, who spent, I think, about a year in China trying to get the two parties together unsuccessfully, also gave advice that he had to have a different attitude towards the people that he was governing. And, Chiang tended to side with the landlords in a situation in which land reform was, of course, going to become a major issue. And so that a lot of the cards were simply on the side of the Communist Party in terms of policy. And they won the war. They could not get Taiwan. And of course, Chiang's forces moved into this island on Taiwan and were ensconced there. If the Chinese Communist Party had a navy, they would have taken that over. But they didn't have a navy at the time, so they couldn't do anything about it. And what the U.S. did, unfortunately, was refuse to accept the facts on the ground in terms of what happened in the Civil War in China, and therefore made Taiwan into the representative of China, for them, and also within the unit because of the influence of the United States also in the United Nations. And it was obviously a situation where the 1 billion plus people compared to the what could it be several 100,000 or in Taiwan indicated that the Republic of China, that the People's Republic of China was really the representative of the Chinese people. But it took a while because of the political machinations from the outside that changed that situation. And even remember that the Chinese government under Chiang Kai-shek and under his son also accepted the fact of the one China policy. But they were on the belief that ultimately we will prevail and we will be the one China, right? So they didn't attack that. But it's the whole thing has become topsy-turvy because of this outside intervention. And it's important for the Chinese because they believe that this is an unresolved issue from the Second World War that remains to be resolved. But I do think that the peaceful reunification is the preferred option for the Chinese government. But because this is being undermined by attempts to encourage independence movement in Taiwan itself, this has caused a lot of trouble there. Let me just mention a couple of things about the Japanese situation, because I mean, they of course are being painted, with the brush of the aggressor and the like. And it's a little more complicated than that. Historically, you've had essentially two factions in Japan dating back to the beginning of the Meiji Revolution, the 1890s. You had Japan as a small country. It's an island country, a small country, not a lot of natural resources. They are going to be, as they became an industrial nation under the influence of the United States, by the way, they felt that these resources would be necessary to maintain their industry. And there were two thoughts about this. One was what I would call peaceful penetration of other countries through trade and investment. That is, to extend, trade agreements and investment agreements to China and to other countries in Southeast Asia in order to gain access to the natural resources that existed there. There was also another faction which said that with the military buildup, with the industrial buildup of Japan, went also a buildup of the Japanese Navy and Army. And there was the idea that because we are really the big guy on the block, we can use that military force in order to get those resources. And there was a big fight in the 1890s over that within the Japanese government, where the Russians were playing a major role in that because they had built this Trans-Siberian Railroad going to the Pacific, which meant that there was a land connection from the Asia Pacific all the way to Europe, so that the trade, there would be, a tremendous increase of trade through that. And that the Russian attitude, which was led by Sergei Witte, who was the finance minister, was that this would be open to China and to Japan and to other countries. So he tried to knit trade agreements between these nations. But in Japan, there was this fight, largely fomented by the British, to get the Japanese to move directly on their own. And they're the ones that won the fight. I might mention also a little known fact that when General Grant visited Asia after his time in the presidency during his trip around the world, he was asked, there was this conflict over what are called the Ryukyu Islands, which now are controlled by Japan. After World War II, we said they belonged to Japan, but they were a conflict between Japan and China. And Grant was in Asia, and he saw this, and he was asked by the Japanese and by the Chinese to mediate that so it wouldn't lead to war. And he did that immediately initially. And then he sent a message back to the State Department. He says, you got to make sure that these countries don't fight each other, because if they do, the British will take over the Asia Pacific region.
Isn't that something interesting?
Yeah,
even
very
he recognized that.
So the situation is, as far as I can see, is what is going to be the reaction within Japan to Takaichi's statements. There have been demonstrations. Former prime ministers have been very outspoken, saying this is crazy. We don't want that. We don't want a conflict. We don't want to enter into conflict over Taiwan. But it's hard to say if, and there have been mass demonstrations outside the prime minister's residence. And she's very new. She's had some problems. She's had a shaky beginning in other respects as well. So there may be a shift there in Japan, because you do have a faction that realizes that a relationship with China, particularly now when they've become a major technological power, where their productive capabilities are much greater now, that the trade would be much more beneficial now to Japan than it would have been like 10, 20 years ago. So that's the conflict that really is kind of playing out at this point. It's interesting, and it should be noted that although the Japanese have been very much allied to U.S. policy after World War II for obvious reasons, the measures that were taken by Takaichi were, of course, not in the interest of the United States at this particular time, in particular, because President Trump has achieved an agreement through his meeting with President Xi on increased trade and development. Now, for the first time in December, there's going to be a delegation of Chinese entrepreneurs coming to the United States to talk about, things that they can possibly do to help here. And this is an important issue for President Trump because trade with China, whatever you might want to say, is really the lifeblood of the United States at this point. And if the United States is to recover its industrial and scientific potential, I think it would do it more quickly through these relationships with the People's Republic of China. How many Chinese scholars, how many Chinese engineers and scientists have come to the United States, been educated, stayed here, and contributed? I mean, that's all changing because of the anti-China feeling here. I think he wants to change that. And what he did, of course, is that President Xi wanted to talk to President Trump about this, partially about this issue, the Takaichi statements. And after that, he called Prime Minister Takaichi, and I think he said to her, cool down a little bit. This is going to be a big problem that will be in our laps at a certain point.
Yeah.
That will also have a role to play, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting, hearing your discussion of some of the history going back to President Grant in that area. When I think of sort of military activity in Asia, typically there's sort of a point in time where you had the Korean War, time of great tension, a very significant war. But then when that was over, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we've had a remarkable degree of peace and fairly harmonious relations between nations. You do have conflicts between Pakistan and India that have been significant, but from the greater picture, if you look at China, where has China been at war with anyone, really? They got involved in the Korean War because we ran right up to the Yalu River, which is a little bit similar to what we're doing with NATO, running right up to the border of Russia today. Nations cannot afford to have enormous military threats directly on their border. So it shouldn't have surprised the United States that the Chinese did come across the border into North Korea during the Korean War. But it just seems like the Asian nations have not been hyper aggressive, and of course, we had the Vietnam War, which is certainly a two-sided affair. There were that was a major conflict, but for the major Asian countries, for China, for Japan, for Korea, there's been this lengthy period of trade, prosperity, economic development, and I think through peace they seem to have just developed their nations remarkably well. And as you mentioned, I think today you would have to say that China is the major factory producer of the world. And you can look at gross domestic product and that sort of thing, but if you look at the consumption of concrete, steel, major industrial materials, you find that China is the great consumer of these things because it is building an industrial base that really supplies the whole world with factory goods. We want to produce more of them in this country. That's fine. I certainly want that, but at the same time, it's just become impractical for nations to produce everything themselves, and foreign trade certainly is enriching the entire globe. So it's interesting. Of all of the countries that have benefited from this relative peace in Asia, Japan has been a huge beneficiary because they really have been out of the war mode since the Second World War. They did not get involved in the Vietnam War, and that really has benefited them. It's benefited all the nations of Asia, it seems.
Well, I think that is the case, and there is a strong opinion, I believe, in Japan on this issue, even though you had some recalcitrant elements who still think of the dream of the old days of the East Asian prosperity zone that come to the fore every now and then. But I think that indeed is a strong opinion in Japan, and I hope that it really comes to the fore in this kind of crisis. I'll just mention on the role of China, however, is that not only the productive capabilities, but they have largely adopted after this craziness with the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and all these things. They began to look around in Asia at Japan, at Singapore, at Korea, and these countries were developed after the war really by the United States on the basis of what I would call Hamiltonian principles. That is, that the government was taking a major role in encouraging investment and private enterprise in the same way that Alexander Hamilton did the beginning of the country, or which Roosevelt did in order to build up during World War II. And we have kind of left that. I mean, we've become, more eager free marketeers that the market does everything and government does nothing. And because the dollar was so strong, we could benefit from that over a period of time. But if we look at our capabilities, our science and technology, what's happening in the schools, we have left a model which has been very successful, and the Chinese have adopted that model. So, I mean, I think if we had a relationship with them, we would gain more from it in reviving the policies that worked best for the United States, in placing science and technology at the center of economic development, because that's what they've done. This latest 5-year plan has been a science and technology development program on steroids, that they want to be on the top in many new fields of technology. And there'll be competition on that. But we are still, flailing a little bit on how we're going to do this, right? And what's happening to NASA, the budget cuts, and a lot of these other things are really undermining a lot of the capabilities that we have. And we don't, we need, as President Trump indicated, a skilled labor force, which we had once upon a time. Now it's much smaller now. And we need also, the unskilled labor, which is being chased out of the country by some of the, immigration thing. I mean, we've got to go back to what I would call the American system, what John F. Kennedy did with that moon program. He set the sights on something far away, but ultimately something that was reachable. And that created decades of economic development for the economy. The science driver is what we need, and I think we could do it together with China. I think they see us as their most important possible partner, not so much as a rival. And in the Asia Pacific, as you mentioned, there's this Confucian idea, which is not only in China but also in Japan and South Korea, was influenced by that, of this notion of harmony, which was Confucius's basic principle, trying to create that. And I think that has helped to prevent the Asia Pacific from being, a war-torn region that it was during World War II because of the unfortunate moves by Japan in that direction. And I think that's going to be the saving grace for them, and maybe we could learn something from that as well.
Yes, well, Bill, this has been a tremendous discussion. One of the things that we discuss from time to time here, we try to inform people and get them to comprehend the enormity of a war between the United States and China, and to point out the fact that when you go back to the Vietnam War, which, where the United States had every conceivable advantage and fought a distant country that was where China today, China's geography is about 30 times the size of what Vietnam's was. Population is roughly in that domain. It's roughly 30 times. It's just an enormous the idea of a conflict on the other side of the globe with such a mammoth country that really doesn't have any interest in war with us. That China, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see the slightest desire on the part of the Chinese people to go to war with the United States. And yet we've got politicians from both parties, all of these war hawks, who are constantly just throwing out this off-the-cuff stuff. Oh, the war with China is inevitable, and it's a level of insanity that goes beyond the insanity of what we're already doing in the Middle East and in Ukraine. So perhaps there'll be a time where we come back and we can discuss some of these things a little bit further, Bill. But do you have a final comment before we sign off?
Well, hopefully, if the agreement between President Trump and President Xi works, I'm hopeful to see more contacts on both sides of the Pacific, that is, Chinese coming here, not only for trade, but also students, cultural events, and the United States going to China. Because the big problem is that, as you mentioned, the United States doesn't really understand, American citizens don't really understand what China is all about. But there's also confusion on the other side of the fence as well, because what they're hearing are these statements by the war hawks, and they think that's what America is. And as we know, that's not what America is. And people who come here and see Americans and can talk to them, that changes the whole situation. So I think the upshot of what hopefully will be closer people and people-to-people relationships on the basis of these latest economic agreements between the U.S. and China may be a saving grace to change that situation, the climate in the United States with regard to the People's Republic of China.
Thank you very much, Bill. We've had Bill Jones from the Executive Intelligence Review, tremendous expert on China. And so we look forward to having you again in the future, Bill. And at this point, we'll sign off until next week at Saturday at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.